Sounds like a plan to me. All right. Good morning, everyone, and great to see you. We hope you had a wonderful weekend. Today, we're going to have a really great presentation, I believe, from Nate today. And so we're very excited to hear from the International Economic Development Council. And with that, I will pass it to our president and leader of AMCC, Matt Bogosian.
Great, Michelle. Thank you. Michelle Burris from the Century Foundation, a longtime BFF and partner doing great work around the country. Always a hearty thank you to you, Michelle, for being the MC on these calls. Welcome all. I'm Matt Bogosian, Executive Director of AMCC, and this is our 30-minute national Monday morning call of regional leaders and BFFs focused on strengthening the American manufacturing cornerstone of the economy from the bottom up, right? For those just joining, you know that you might not know, but you do now that AMCC is a free open source national nonprofit partnering with the federal government to convene these calls, expand our impact. And we have round robin discussions on these Monday calls. Sometimes the whole call, other times with conversations with what we call best friends forever in the kind of the ecosystem of support that a strong regional manufacturing community needs. This is a place, you know, to share best practices, confront problems, share info about events to attend. This week, we're going to have a conversation, like Michelle said, with CEO of IEDC, Nate Ohle. But before that, we ask you to do two things. Put your name and affiliation in chat, and also use the chat. The second thing is use the chat. Say hello, you know, introduce yourself if you're new, share something useful others might use. Like we have presentations, so you can ask questions the presenters that occur to you, put it in there. But you know, anything that you think is going to help advance American manufacturing, something that you're doing in your region that could be helpful, or a question that you have from your region. We've got stakeholders around the country that can help one another. We're trying to, you know, work together. This is a team sport, creating systems change, and we all have, you know, different, you know, perches in the manufacturing community ecosystem, and public organizations, private nonprofits. It's all important. We need a lot of hands. The more hands, the better. Before I turn it to the conversation with Nate, as we also do on this call, we like to highlight a few things from the AMCC update email that go out weekly. If you don't get it, sign up online, or easier still, you can grab David Van Sicklen's email. David's our operations director, AMCC operations director. His email, I think, is in the chat, and just ask David to put you on the list to get those AMCC updates. And then, you know, on the update, like if you haven't shared it with your regional network or other BFFs that you think, you know, can add value to the manufacturing ecosystem, forward it and get them to sign up too. So anyway, we have lots of work to do. So on the AMCC update that went out on Saturday, the reason why it went out on Saturday is because we were doing the kind of the second step of our California AMCC roadshow visit. If you don't know about the AMCC roadshows, David can drop the link to reports of the roadshows that we've done around the country. And that includes this work last week in California, where AMCC took a leading role in the California Economic Summit. And you know, they have some really interesting tactics in the state government that folks in the state government are working to add value to the manufacturing ecosystem. We've seen that in states all around the country, different approaches to having state government strengthen the manufacturing ecosystem in regions within their jurisdiction. So California's got, you know, that looks like they're heading toward a manufacturing council. They've broken the state up into 13 regions. We can tell you more about that and share in the report that'll come out in the coming weeks about California's work, like the work in many other regions around the country and states. Lots of cool stuff. As you might remember, we had Bill Eggers from Deloitte, author and kind of a thought leader from Deloitte on an earlier AMCC call. Well, because of the AMCC network, we got Bill connected to California, and he was the keynote speaker at this big, multi-day California Economic Summit. He was the one, if you recall, he wrote the book Bridge Builders recently, and he talks about the importance of doing systems leadership for sustainable development in any context. Of course, our context is strengthening the manufacturing ecosystem. In the AMCC update from last week, there's useful information about trade and international investment, like one of the big 6 areas of a thriving regional manufacturing ecosystem, going back to the IMCP days. If you're wondering how trade can help in your region, there's info in there that's a good starting point that you can bring to your regional stakeholders. There's also a great report in there from Accenture that they did a huge survey of CEOs, and a couple of data points like scream out there about the trend that's happening in American manufacturing. 94% of this huge survey of CEOs are planning investment in onshoring and nearshoring. And check out this number: 54% of these CEOs think manufacturing closer to home is key to survival. So anyway, this trend is happening, and a lot of things. So lots of good things there. I also put in the AMCC update the announcement of the American Climate Corps. So anyway, lots of crossover for manufacturing there. And talk of a manufacturing technology core would be very cool too. So anyway, all that is in the AMCC update. So check it out, share it with your network, and we can move forward and present ideas on what ought to be added. If something's cool is happening in your region, let us know, and we can look at putting that in the AMCC update too. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Nate Ohle. Nate is CEO of IEDC, International Membership Organization, that has a whole new strategic plan that we want to hear about. For those who might recall Nate, he was an official at the Department of Commerce when IMCP was created, so he knows all about the IMCP AMCC work to implement bottom-up interventions to strengthen manufacturing communities. And Nate was at the Manufacturing Momentum Summit held last week in the DC area. So Nate, welcome. Tell us a bit about your journey and the new approach that IEDC is taking. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you. As Matt said, I'm Nathan Ohle. I'm the President and CEO of the International Economic Development Council. I've been here for a little over a year and a half now, about 20 months. But spent a lot of time, as Matt said, working directly with manufacturing communities and certainly in the economic development space writ large. I started my career back in Michigan, my home state, serving for now former Governor Jennifer Granholm, now Secretary Granholm, and then spent 5 years at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, right in the heart of the recession, basically from 2007 to 2012. Leading 3 different economic development boards for the state, everything from your basic incentive programs to CDBG and industrial revenue bonds, all the way to running our first ever statewide business planning competition and funding seed and pre-seed companies and trying to attract venture capital, and obviously working throughout the manufacturing base in the state of Michigan in a really deep way. I then came to DC and served at the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Again, I was there in the heart of IMCP, so it's very close to my heart. It was great at the summit to hear the conversations about not just what IMCP was, but what it led to and some of the partnerships that continue to this day. And at ADA, I spent about 2.5 years leading the policy and external affairs for the agency. And then before coming to IEDC, I ran an organization called the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, which is a national network of nonprofit partners working in rural and tribal places across the United States on a whole host of issues: economic development and entrepreneurship, but also things like access to safe drinking water, sanitary wastewater, disaster recovery, really focused on building capacity. And I came to IEDC. I've known IEDC for decades, obviously from my time in Michigan, but I came to IEDC because of the unique opportunity that I felt not just the organization, but the economic development profession has today. IEDC is the world's largest economic development association. We've got about 4,300 members across the world, most of those centered here in the United States, but we've got about 25 countries represented through those members. And as a membership association, we do some of your typical association work. We obviously bring people together through convenings. We have 3 big events that we host each year. We just had our annual conference in Dallas this past year, where we had 1,500 people from across the world coming together to learn from one another, to connect, to talk about the issues that are confronting their communities, and certainly the opportunities they're seeing, especially from a manufacturing perspective. We also have professional development opportunities. We have courses and certification programs, both for individuals and for organizations. So we have individual courses anyone can take, but we also have 2 different certifications for individuals. One is kind of the gold standard in the economic development field, called the Certified Economic Developer, which is kind of your tried and true kind of broad base of economic development. And then a second one that's a little bit newer, called the Entrepreneurship Development Professional, or EDP, focused on entrepreneurship-led economic development. And how do you drive small business growth and entrepreneurship as a core tenet of your economic development strategies? We also do a ton of research. We have a research arm called our Economic Development Research Partners, where we identify 2 to 3 topics that are really important to the economic development field, and we take a practitioner lens from that. So we're taking data and research and honing it for a practitioner to be able to utilize, understand, and move and act on. And then we also think about, how do we build partnerships with other organizations and entities doing really fantastic research work, and how do we continue to bring the economic development perspective to those conversations. We do advocacy in public affairs. Certainly, being a DC-based association, we do a lot of work from a federal perspective. Obviously, all of you on this call are highly engaged or even members of the federal family. And so we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we can advocate and effectuate good policy to make sure that there's opportunities for economic developers to really move the field forward itself. And then we're always looking to build partnerships. So for us, that means partnerships with other entities, other organizations, other associations, not just here in the United States, but internationally, to make sure that we can lift up their work, amplify their work, as Matt talked about earlier, build storytelling aspects to this work, and ensure that we can, not just us that are practitioners, but the public at large can understand, what is economic development? What does it mean for your community? What does it look like and feel like in your community? And how, in particular, to those on the call today, how does manufacturing play a significant role in driving opportunity in communities and regions, not just across the United States, but quite frankly, across the world? We did just launch our strategic plan at our annual conference just a few weeks back. This is a pretty transformative strategic plan for the organization. It's the first time that we spent this deep level of learning and engaging, not just with our membership, but stakeholders and folks that aren't even members of IEDC, but are still in the economic development field. We engaged more than 900 people through this process in hopes to bring their voice as a part of this conversation, and obviously a part of the future of IEDC and of economic development. And out of that came 3 major priorities. One is to impact the individual and the organization, a second to impact the profession, and a third to impact the global community. And underneath each of those 3 priorities are our guiding principles: a focus on ensuring that we have diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in all of our programs and all of the things that we want to push forward from a strategic planning process. One focused on organizational excellence, to make sure that we can build the greatest organization, tools and resources, and easiest to use tools and resources for our members and for the profession itself. And to make sure that we're engaging stakeholders and in a collaborative approach. So everything that we would do, we want to make sure that we've got the voice of our stakeholders, of the economic development profession, in the work that we're doing and the things that we're moving forward. For us, that means that we're going to be much more deeply engaged on public policy, that we are going to be building thought leadership partnerships, whether that's research focused, whether that is engaging in communities of practice like this, whether that is thinking through new ways to tell stories. We want to be building partnerships that are going to help improve the profession, the individuals, and the organizations that serve those communities, and ensure that we can tell the story of what's happening in those communities, both sometimes the good and the difficult conversations, to ensure that we can continue to move the field forward and provide more opportunities to communities. And we always, of course, want to make sure that we're building partnerships with organizations, with groups like this, to make sure that we have the voice of a multitude of experiences and understanding that different focus areas. We know economic development is a really broad field, and we want to make sure that we can engage in a whole host of conversations around that and show up at conversation around those topics. That also means that we're going to be engaging in conversations with folks that are maybe not directly engaged in economic development. So that may mean housing conversations. It may mean infrastructure conversations. That may mean workforce conversations. We know that all of these things, especially given the pandemic, are intrinsically engaged in economic development. So we want to make sure that we're building partnerships, recognizing the need to have a more comprehensive and holistic approach at a community level, and ensuring that we not only can build conversations ourselves, but show up to other conversations to move the field itself forward. For me, I'm really excited about all the work that's happening around community practice, but particularly this one. Obviously, my background and expertise, I've spent a ton of time. My home state of Michigan, obviously, is a manufacturing hotbed and always been a huge pillar of the workforce, of the economy in Michigan, and certainly that's the case here in the United States, and even in many places around the world. So I wanted to make this conversation much more conversational. So I would love to open it up to questions you might have about how we can help contribute, or things that you're seeing or hearing or feeling on the ground. Where can we be helpful? Where can we be a better partner to this group, and certainly to the communities you all collectively serve?
That's great, Nate. Thank you. So if you've got a question, just drop it in chat, or David can monitor the hand raise thing. You know, I mean, I'm thinking, you know, what can we do to help you too, Nate? You know, we have, you know, the long history. We have a lot of stakeholders. Like one of the stories that needs to get told is about capacity, you know, for regions to absorb all of the cool, you know, new interventions. I was talking about some state interventions, but of course we have, you know, we have the brand new, you know, hydrogen hubs that are out there, the tech hub program. There's a lot of interventions out there, which is very cool, but it raises, you know, challenges in terms of just knowing about these things, much less, you know, putting together the capacity to effectively apply for them and whatnot. What are the stories you're telling about that? How, if at all, can you add value to our regional stakeholders on that front? Yeah.
Well, you hit on a really important part, Matt, and that is the capacity issue of this, right? There's a historic amount of funding that's available right now across a pretty wide diversity of not just federal agencies, but obviously program focus areas. You know, I think for us, we want to make sure that we're helping to build capacity all the way across the spectrum of communities and the capacity they currently have. So I'll tell you, one of my biggest concerns is back in the 2008 recession. I don't know that we collectively did a good enough job of building capacity of distressed places to be able to actually, you know, access the funds that came as a result of that. And so today we see obviously some communities that are ripe and ready to engage in these conversations and to apply for these opportunities. And we see some communities that just don't have the capacity, number one, to even understand what those opportunities are, let alone engage a grant writer or go after a regional partnership to build out these opportunities, and let alone be successful in that. And so we're really focused on how do we build capacity across that spectrum of communities. One example of that is a focus on those more distressed places that may not have that capacity yet. It's a new program called the Economic Recovery Corps. It's a partnership between us, the National Association of Counties, the National Association of Development Organizations, the National League of Cities, the International City and County Managers Association, the Center on Rural Innovation, and the Regional Accelerator and Innovation Network. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to embed fellows directly into distressed places, rural, urban, tribal in nature, for 2.5 years to help them build capacity from an economic development perspective. How do they build out those plans? How do they build out the relationships necessary to drive regional collaboration in these instances? But it's not the only example of how we want to help build capacity, because there are a lot of communities that are further along in that spectrum. And how do we make sure that we can get the information out to them so they're aware of what those opportunities are? And then more importantly, to your point, Matt, how do we tell the story of what that success has looked like or will look like in the future? And so we're thinking through a whole host of ways to do that, through video storytelling, through obviously, you know, more general newsletters and things like that. But we want to build partnerships with groups like this to help shine a light on those great stories. All of you have great stories to tell. And so we'd love, you know, wherever we can to amplify those stories, whether it's through our conferences, whether it's through our newsletters, whether it's through webinars and other things. So as you guys have stories you want to tell or that you're already telling, we can help amplify those stories and make sure that those stories are going as wide and far as possible.
That's great, Nate. Hey, we have a question from one of our BFFs in California from Goodwill Industries, Danny. Question for Nate?
Hey, Matt, how's it going? Hey, Nathan, how's it going? Daniel Wehrman, Sector Strategies Manager for Goodwill Southern California, primarily intermediary role, doing a lot of work in manufacturing and things like that. So I'm wondering from an international scale, really, but, maybe zoom in on the United States for the workforce development tree, because we tree topped a lot there and you'd have a lot but for the workforce development tree, what are you seeing as far as collaborating the different partners in that tree? Because there's employers, there's nonprofits, there's trainers, and then there's local government. What are the big problems in the way of really organizing all of those entities together in a region? Because you got to function in them in a region, you know what I mean? So
Yep.
if you could speak more to that, that'd be great.
So I think what I'll say is probably the most easily identifiable, and that is building those relationships, those connections is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes a commitment to wanting to be collaborative. And I'll tell you from an economic development perspective, right? The history of economic development is one of competition, not necessarily of collaboration. But I think those communities, those regions that have started to build those connections, whether it's between the community colleges, the employers, the nonprofits in the area, those regions that have started that work or started it several years ago are well ahead of many other areas. And so it takes time and effort to build those relationships, to build that trust. And quite frankly, little missteps can be much more detrimental than even the big successes in building those. And so it is really a deep commitment to building those connections, to understand that maybe the benefit of the whole is more important than the benefit of one individual group, for example. And that's not an easy thing to build. There are certainly some great examples of where that is happening, and we've seen as a result of that some really cool and transformative projects happening from a workforce perspective. And again, I think it goes back to my earlier conversation of, in economic development, historically, maybe we've thought, oh, this is what we do, and we'll let the workforce people do their thing. We'll let the infrastructure folks do their thing. We'll let the housing folks do their thing. We're not in a moment in time now that we can continue to do that. And so we've got to come together to understand how those things are interconnected and how building relationships and connections are going to really benefit regions in the long run.
Hey, Nate, a question about the commitment to DEIA and really kind of regional diversity, which you're on board with this, because going back to IMCP, the idea of not just having the cool kids in economic development and sustainable development thrive, or in manufacturing thrive, right? We want to distribute this throughout the country, so we come together over time. And so I know your personal commitment to easy access to kind of the community of practice and whatnot. And so now you're in a membership organization, so you got to pay to play full-throated, and that's a business model decision. The story of IMCP is like this volunteer group that stuck together, so this cool idea didn't die on the vine. And then we're lucky enough to get this community of practice grant, which is cool, and we can still be open source, and free and all of that stuff. That's one of the rationale for why we want to create this manufacturing community ecosystem metrics tool and playbook, so that the access to the scaffolding of progress, people can self-assess their regional manufacturing ecosystem. Like, how do you see, your work in terms of the open source world, so they don't necessarily have to be a member? I'm not trying to discourage membership. I'm just saying, we want to bring everybody in and avoid barriers as possible. What's your take on how we make progress bringing, all regions in on this?
Well, I think the access piece of DEIA is really critical in this one, and it's something that we as an organization are thinking deeply about. I'll give you one example of how we started to change and think about the way that we better engage and provide resources that are more accessible and not necessarily have to be in order to get. So on the research side, the economic development research partners historically had been essentially a pay-to-play thing, right? You're here, you pay to be a part of this group, you get access to these resources, and those resources don't necessarily go out beyond that group, or maybe they go, in a first glance to that group and then to membership, but then not beyond membership. We've actually taken the paywall down from all of our research. So all of our research reports through the last decade are available to anyone to use, to see, to read for free. Now, from an economic standpoint as an organization, that's a difficult conversation to have. It just is.
Yeah.
But to me, if we've got tools and resources that are going to be really useful to practitioners, whether they're members or not, that they're going to help move the field forward, the profession forward, we want to provide access to those. Same thing from an international perspective. Not only, from a membership perspective, it's expensive to be a member. But if you're international, if you're in Southeast Asia, or if you're in the Middle East or in Asia or Africa, not only is it a resource perspective, it's also a time zone perspective. And how do you engage in the best way for that? And so we're thinking through our membership model itself. How do we make sure it's accessible as possible, both for individuals and for organizations, but also for different regions of the world? And how do we make sure where we can build some flexibility that's going to allow for some resources to be free for access, or at least a portion of them to be free for access? We want to do that. We can't obviously do that for every single thing that we do, because we are a membership association, but we want to provide opportunities for people to be able to engage with us, whether they're members or not. And the goal, obviously, is hopefully that we showcase and highlight the great tools and resources that are available that make people want to be members and make them understand how important it is to be part of this economic development community that we're continuing to build. And so it is a balance to find, for sure, but where we can, examples like that research that is now available to anyone, we want to make sure we can do that.
That's great, because there's a lot of folks in that zone, the research and really kind of evidence-based, approach that want to do the public. A lot of them are on this call from, private entities like, Accenture, Deloitte, other NGOs around the country. So you heard at the Manufacturing Momentum Summit about this manufacturing community ecosystem metrics tool development process. So we'd love to have you participate in that. Yeah. So, any other questions for Nate? It's awesome to have you on here, Nate. Hopefully you and your network can participate 30 minutes, every week. We'd love to have kind of a continuing thread of engagement, and looking forward to opportunities on, how we operationalize that. Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions for Nate? Great. Anything else that we can do, Nate, to help IEDC?
Well, to me, it is just keeping the lines of communication open. I'm going to put my email address and my cell phone in the chat. Feel free to reach out any way that I or the organization would be helpful. If there are stories that we can help shine a light on, but also as you guys start to think about, where you want to go as a group, what other tools and resources might be most helpful to you, whether we have them in-house or whether it's something we might be able to collaborate with all of you on. We'd love to have those conversations.
Nancy Gilbert, Nancy, do you want to speak to, you just dropped a note in the chat about Engine?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Just recognizing, hi Nathan, we see each other quite a bit in different projects that EDA supports for IEDC, which we've done over the years. And one of them is this Equity Impact Investments program, which is recently kicked off its workshops for economic development organizations, which IEDC is helping to lead them through a curriculum on how best to partner with community-based organizations who may be doing work, that's outside of, but so totally aligned with economic development. And they're going to have another cohort running on that soon. So that's a place where groups like those in this community of practice who are really leading the manufacturing strategies in their regions might want to take a look at that program and the curriculum that IEDC is building for that, which I think will be something that may be shareable in the future for others, and how that can really benefit. So I just wanted to recognize that. They're also driving our Economic Recovery Corps program that we've talked about before on this, which is going to help build that capacity in regions as well to move forward on some innovative initiatives, including some that are manufacturing based, we hope.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Nancy. And thanks again, Nate. Let me turn it back to you, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Matt, and thank you so much, Nate, for the great presentation. Everyone, we look forward to seeing you next Monday at the same time, and we're wishing you all a wonderful week. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.